The galaxy was silent, and that silence was not peaceful. It was hopeless. Worlds that once shined with color and laughter now lay in smoke and ashes. Whole civilizations had fallen to darkness, their people scattered or enslaved by the invaders who came from beyond the stars. These invaders had no mercy, no heart, no pity. They came like storms, destroying everything in their path, leaving nothing but fire and cold behind. On every planet, the same cries were heard, voices begging for someone to help them, to save them, to end their pain. But no one answered. The stars had turned their faces away. On the small moon of Vareth, the night was heavy and full of fear. The last temple still stood among broken stone towers and cracked glass domes. Inside it, the priest gathered around a single flame that struggled to stay alive. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and old incense. They were old, tired, and weak, their robes torn, their faces covered in dust and tears. But they still prayed. Their hands were lifted toward the dark sky, trembling, their voices breaking as they whispered the same ancient words again and again. Please, someone help us. They knew their enemies were coming. Outside the temple, they could hear the distant sound of ships and explosions. The invaders were burning the last cities, destroying every ship that tried to escape. The priests knew there was nowhere left to run. Yet even in that hopeless moment, they did what their ancestors had done thousands of years ago. They prayed. They prayed not to gods of war, but to the stars themselves, hoping that something, someone, somewhere would listen. Among them was a young girl named Lyra. She was not a priest, just a servant, but she believed more deeply than anyone else. Her parents had died in the first attack, and she had seen her home destroyed. Still, she came every night to light the last candle in the temple. Her eyes were full of tears as she whispered, "If there is anyone out there, please, we need you. We are dying." The oldest priest, Grand Elder Varen, placed his hand on her head and said softly, "Child, there was once a story told to us by our ancestors, a story about beings from a distant, dangerous world. They said those beings were born from a planet that was full of fire and storms, where even the smallest creature had to fight to survive. The galaxy called them Deathworlders." Lyra looked up, her eyes wide. "Deathworlders. Are they monsters?" Varen smiled faintly. Some said they were. Some said they were angels wearing the armor of demons. They came only when the universe cried out for help. But they vanished long ago, and no one knows if they still exist. Outside, thunder rolled across the black sky, not from weather, but from weapons. The last defense towers were falling. The priests continued their prayers, their voices growing weaker. One by one, the candles went out until only a single flame remained. That last flame flickered on the altar, reflected in the tears of those who had nothing left but faith. Meanwhile, above the planet, the enemy ships circled like vultures. Their commander, a cruel warlord named Zarvek, watched from his bridge with cold amusement. "End this world," he ordered. "Let their screams fade into the dust." His fleet began its descent, filling the sky with burning light. Lyra fell to her knees, covering her ears as the ground trembled. She shouted through her tears, "Please, someone hear us. Please, if you are real, if you can see us, save us." Her voice was small, lost among the chaos, but it carried something powerful, a pure, desperate hope, and somewhere far beyond their galaxy, in a region of space no one dared to visit, something ancient stirred. The signal of her prayer, a mix of sound, heat, and emotion, traveled through the void, passing dead stars and forgotten worlds. It reached a place where ships of iron slept, their engines silent, their pilots waiting for a call that had not come in centuries. A monitor flickered to life in a dark control room. A voice, human and calm, broke the long silence. "Distress signal detected. Coordinates received." Another voice answered, firm and steady. "Origin. Outer Rim unknown system. Civilian population under siege." The commander stood from his chair, tall and scarred, his eyes filled with a quiet fire. "How long since the last call for help?" 300 years, the computer replied. The commander nodded slowly. "Then it's time." Engines roared to life. Across the hidden base, alarms echoed, lights flashed, and soldiers hurried to their stations. Ships that had not flown for generations began to hum and awaken. They bore the mark of Earth, the blue planet that no one in the wider galaxy believed still existed. The humans were returning, but on Vareth no one knew that yet. The priests thought their prayers had vanished into nothingness. The enemy was closing in. The temple walls shook. Lyra held onto the altar, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered one last time. Don't let this be the end. Then for a moment everything went silent. The explosion stopped. The air grew heavy, electric. Even the invaders looked up, sensing something they couldn't understand. The clouds above the moon began to twist, glowing with strange blue light. The invaders' sensors went mad, detecting multiple unidentified energy sources entering orbit. Grand Elder Varen raised his head. The stars, he murmured, his old eyes wide with wonder. They are answering. High above, streaks of fire cut through the darkness, ships descending fast, faster than anything the enemy had ever seen. They didn't look like the sleek, polished ships of the galactic races. They were dark, rough, and terrifying, like pieces of war itself given shape. Lyra stepped outside the broken temple and looked up. The sight stole her breath away. Hundreds of metal giants fell from the heavens, surrounded by burning trails. For a second, she thought the end had come, but then she felt something. An energy, strong and warm, filling her heart with courage instead of fear. The invaders panicked. Their commander shouted orders, but it was too late. The Deathworlders had arrived. Lyra didn't know who they were, where they came from, or what they wanted. But she knew one thing: their prayer had been heard. Help had come, not from gods, but from the stars themselves. And as the night sky exploded in light, the people of Vareth realized that their story was not ending. It was only beginning. For the first time in years, hope returned. It didn't come gently nor softly. It came like thunder, wrapped in flame, born from a world that the galaxy had forgotten. The Deathworlders were real, and they were coming down from the stars. The night after the first prayer had been answered, the galaxy began to change. It started quietly, almost too quietly to notice. Across the stars, in observatories and battle stations, strange signals began to appear on scanners, tiny flashes of energy that didn't belong to any known race or weapon. At first, scientists thought it was a mistake, maybe an error in their systems, but the signals kept coming. They were rhythmic, organized, and strong. Something was moving through space, something powerful and fast. On the moon of Vareth, the survivors hid among the ruins, staring at the sky. They didn't know what was happening above them, but they could feel it. The air seemed alive with energy, the ground humming faintly beneath their feet. The invaders, too, noticed it. Their ship's sensors started failing one by one, and their communication lines broke down. Commander Zarvik slammed his clawed hand on the console. "What is happening?" he shouted. His officers scrambled to answer, but none could explain it. There was interference coming from deep space. Something large was entering their system, but the readings made no sense. Far beyond the reach of their scanners, hidden in the darkness between stars, a fleet moved like shadows through the void. Their engines glowed blue, slicing through the endless night. The ships were enormous, old, scarred, but alive with energy. They bore a symbol that had not been seen in the galaxy for centuries, a circle with a blue and green world inside it. Earth. The humans had returned. Inside the lead ship, the command deck was silent except for the steady hum of machinery. Captain Ryan Holt stood before the main screen, his eyes sharp and steady. His face was lined with old battle scars, and his uniform carried the marks of long wars fought and survived. He looked at the map projected before him, a small moon surrounded by an enemy fleet. "So that's where the signal came from?" he asked. "Yes, sir," replied his second officer, a woman named Kara Ilian. "A distress beacon, buried inside an old religious transmission. The people are under siege. Their defenses are gone. The enemy has them surrounded." Holt crossed his arms. "And nobody else responded?" Kara shook her head. "No one. It's an abandoned sector. The other colonies think it's cursed." Holt looked down for a moment, then whispered, "They prayed for help, and we heard." He turned to his crew. "Prepare the fleet. We descend at dawn." The crew moved with silent discipline. They were Deathworlders, humans who had been raised on the harshest planet known. Their homeworld, Earth, had almost destroyed them with its storms, predators, and endless dangers. But instead of dying, humanity had adapted. They became strong, clever, and unbreakable. To the galaxy's peaceful races, they were creatures of nightmare, too fierce, too wild. That was why the humans had left the known worlds long ago, choosing isolation over fear. But now someone had called for help, and humans couldn't ignore that. Not again. On Vareth, Lyra woke before sunrise. The sky glowed with strange lights, bright and shifting like an aurora. She stepped out of the temple ruins and stared upward. "What is that?" she whispered. The priests joined her, their eyes wide. Even the invaders paused, staring at the horizon. Then it began. From beyond the atmosphere, a thunder rolled across the sky. The clouds twisted and burned as fiery streaks appeared above. The invaders' ships tried to scan them, but their systems went blind. "Unidentified crafts detected," shouted one of Zarvek's officers. "They're entering orbit at impossible speed." Zarvek snarled. "Shoot them down!" But it was already too late. The first of the Deathworlder ships broke through the clouds like falling stars, surrounded by blue fire. They didn't come in silence, they came with a roar that shook the mountains. The air burned with light and the invaders' command systems began to fail one by one. In the main invader ship, Zarvek stared in disbelief. "What kind of ships are those?" His engineer replied, trembling. "Unknown class. Their armor is. It's too thick to read. Their weapons are. We can't identify them. Sir, they're unlike anything we've ever seen." Zarvek's eyes narrowed. "Then we destroy them. All batteries, fire!" Hundreds of red beams shot into the sky, but the Deathworlders were ready. Their ships moved like hunters, fast and precise. Blue energy shields flared around them, absorbing the attacks. In a single counterstrike, they unleashed bright flashes that tore through the invader fleet. Explosions lit up the sky like fireworks. Down on the surface, the people of Vareth watched in awe. The night had turned into day, filled with the fire of battle. The invaders' ships, once symbols of terror, now burned and fell like broken stars. Lyra clasped her hands together and whispered, "They heard us. They really heard us." Above, Captain Holt stood on his bridge, watching the battle unfold. "They don't even know who we are," he said quietly. "To them, we're just another storm." Kara looked at him. "Then let's show them what kind of storm Earth makes." The Deathworlders fought with a ferocity the galaxy had forgotten. Their ships dived straight into enemy lines, using every ounce of skill and courage. They didn't hide behind shields for long. They attacked head-on, relying on instinct and precision. Every human pilot knew the risk, but none hesitated. They had come to protect, not to survive. In less than an hour, half the invader fleet was gone. The rest tried to flee, but the humans blocked every escape route. It was not just war, it was a message. The Deathworlders had returned, and they would not allow cruelty to rule the stars again. Zarvek's ship trembled as another explosion rocked it. "Who are they?" he screamed. "What kind of monsters are these?" His officer's voice was shaking. "Their transmissions identify them as humans. Origin Earth." Zarvek froze. The word hit him like a blade. "Earth? That world was supposed to be dead." "Apparently not, sir," the officer whispered. For the first time, Zarvek felt something he had never felt before: fear. Meanwhile, on the ground, Lyra and the others ran out from their hiding places as the invaders retreated in chaos. A massive shadow passed over them, a Deathworlder dropship descending. Its engines thundered as it landed near the temple. Dust swirled everywhere, and the air was thick with heat. The door opened with a hiss, and a tall figure stepped out. He wore heavy armor, scratched and dark, with a blue symbol of Earth on his chest. His helmet covered his face, but his voice was calm. "Is anyone alive here?" Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding. "You came," she whispered. The soldier looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You called," he said. "We answered." Behind him, more soldiers emerged. Men and women of Earth, their movements silent and sure. They began helping the wounded, giving food and water, setting up shelters. They were not gods, but they felt like them, strong, unbreakable, and full of quiet compassion. In the sky above, the battle slowly ended. The last of the invader ships exploded, sending trails of light across the heavens. The Deathworlder fleet hovered in silence, victorious. Back on the flagship, Captain Holt watched the burning remains of the enemy disappear. "Signal the ground teams," he said. "Tell them to begin aid operations. No one else dies here today." Kara nodded. "Yes, sir. And what about the rest of the galaxy? They'll notice this." Holt gave a small, tired smile. "Good. Let them notice. Let them remember what happens when the innocent pray for help." As dawn broke over Vareth, the people came out of hiding. They looked up at the ships above them, gleaming like new stars. For generations, they had believed the galaxy had abandoned them. Now they knew that wasn't true. Somewhere out there among the endless stars, there was a world so fierce that even death feared it, and its children had heard their cry. That morning, the survivors of Vareth began to rebuild. The Deathworlders watched over them. silent guardians from another world. Lyra stood at the edge of the temple ruins, her eyes full of tears, not of sorrow but of awe. They came from the stars, she whispered softly. They came for us. And high above, in the quiet of space, the Earth fleet drifted among the ashes of battle, ready, waiting, and listening for the next prayer that would rise from a broken world. The day the Deathworlders landed on Vareth, the sky itself seemed to change. It was no longer the color of fear or fire. It became a battlefield of hope. The air was filled with the sound of engines roaring and metal clashing. People who had lived under darkness for years came out of hiding, their hearts beating fast with something they had forgotten: courage. The first soldiers from Earth moved through the ruins with quiet focus. Their armor was heavy and dark, scarred by old battles, and yet it shined faintly under the light of the twin suns. Their helmets covered their faces, but their voices were calm, their tone steady, giving orders, helping the wounded, securing the streets. To the people of Vareth, they looked like living machines. But when one of them removed his helmet to give water to a child, everyone gasped. They were not gods or monsters, they were human. Captain Ryan Holt walked among his soldiers, his boots echoing on the broken stones. He was a tall man, built strong by years of surviving on Earth's harsh lands. His eyes were sharp, filled with both kindness and steel. Every move he made carried quiet authority. "Check the eastern quarter," he ordered. "Rescue anyone still alive. We'll hold the square until the evacuation ships arrive." Around him, his team moved quickly. One of them, Lieutenant Kara, knelt beside a wounded villager, carefully treating his burns. "You're safe now," she said softly. The man looked at her, confused. Why are you helping us?" he asked weakly. Kara smiled. "Because you asked for help." Up in the skies, the battle was still raging. The invader fleet had regrouped, sending reinforcements. Dozens of ships entered the atmosphere, firing down on the Deathworlders. The humans responded immediately. Their fighter jets rose like hawks, diving straight into the fire. The sky turned into a storm of explosions and light. On the ground, people covered their ears as thunder rolled above. But to the Deathworlders, it was music, the rhythm of survival, the sound they had known all their lives. They didn't run from the fight. They ran toward it. Their machines moved like living beasts, tanks gliding over ruins, drones scanning the skies, and soldiers moving in tight formation. Captain Holt stood in the command post watching the battle map. "Enemy forces are splitting," Kara reported. "They're trying to encircle us," Holt nodded. "Let them. They'll learn what happens when you corner humans." The enemy commander, Zarvek, watched from his flagship, furious. "These creatures fight like demons. They don't retreat, they don't break, they just keep coming." His second-in-command trembled. "Sir, our losses are increasing. They're using old technology, but somehow it's stronger. Their weapons, they burn through our shields like paper," Zarvek roared. "Then double the firepower. I want them erased from this world." The next wave of attacks came harder than before. Massive plasma bombs rained down, shaking the surface of Vareth. Buildings crumbled, dust filled the air. Lyra, the young girl from the temple, ran through the chaos searching for survivors. She saw a child trapped under rubble and screamed for help. A Deathworlder soldier appeared within seconds, lifting a massive block of concrete as if it were nothing. "Get her out!" he shouted. Lyra pulled the child to safety, coughing, her eyes wide. "Thank you," she cried. The soldier only nodded. "Stay behind cover." Everywhere across the city, scenes like this unfolded, humans fighting, protecting, saving. They didn't act like conquerors. They acted like guardians. And they fought not for power, but for the people who had called to them. Above the battlefield, the flagship Valiant Dawn hovered in orbit, leading the human fleet. Its cannons glowed with light, firing beam after beam into the enemy ships. The crew worked tirelessly. "Multiple enemy signatures destroyed," shouted a technician. "But they keep coming, sir." Holt's voice came over the comms, calm and steady. "Then we keep going. For every child hiding in fear, for every prayer that reached us, we keep going." Hours turned into days. The war for Vareth became one of the most brutal battles ever fought. The Deathworlders faced impossible odds, but they refused to give up. Even when their ships were damaged, even when supplies ran low, they adapted, repaired, and fought on. Their strength came not from their weapons, but from their will. The galaxy had called Earth a death world because it was too dangerous for life. But it was that danger that had shaped humanity. They had learned to survive through storms, through hunger, through pain. Every human soldier carried that spirit, the unbreakable will to fight until the very end. On the fourth day, the invaders launched their largest assault. Hundreds of ships descended at once, filling the skies. The ground trembled as their massive walkers approached. The priests of Vareth watched from the temple ruins, their hearts sinking. They can't win against that, one whispered. But Lyra shook her head. They will. I know they will. And then it happened. The Deathworlders activated their final weapon, something the galaxy had never seen before. High above the planet, the human flagship opened its lower decks, revealing a glowing core. Energy gathered around it, spinning faster and faster until a wave of pure light erupted downward. It wasn't meant to destroy, it was meant to disable. The enemy ships froze, their systems collapsing one by one. Their weapons shut down, their engines died. Captain Holt stood on the bridge watching the display. EMP wave successful. Begin counterattack. His ships moved in like lightning, finishing what the energy pulse had started. Within hours, the enemy fleet was broken. The remaining invaders tried to retreat, but the Deathworlders didn't chase them. Holt gave a simple command. Let them go. Let them tell the galaxy what they saw here. On the surface, silence slowly replaced the sound of war. The fires began to die out. The people of Vareth stepped out into the open, blinking in the sunlight. Everywhere they looked, they saw human soldiers helping, rebuilding, and protecting. Lyra found Captain Holt standing near the edge of the city, looking at the horizon. His armor was scratched and covered in dust, his face tired but peaceful. She walked up to him shyly. You saved us? She said softly. He looked down at her and smiled faintly. No, you saved yourselves when you didn't give up. But you came, she insisted. You heard us, Holt nodded. We always hear. Sometimes it just takes time for us to reach you. She frowned. Will you stay? His eyes grew distant. No, we don't stay. We come when we're needed, and then we go. There are others out there who still need help. Lyra's eyes filled with tears. Then you're angels. Holt shook his head slowly. No, little one. We're humans, and that's enough. The people gathered around, watching the Deathworlders prepare to leave. They had expected saviors of light, beings of divine power. Instead, they found something even stronger. Humans with hearts that refused to stop fighting for what was right. That night, the stars shined brighter than ever. The invaders were gone, their ships scattered and defeated. For the first time in many generations, Vareth was free. The priests sang songs of gratitude and children danced under the sky. But in the hearts of everyone, one truth echoed again and again. When they prayed for help, it wasn't gods who answered. It was the Deathworlders. Up in orbit, the valiant Dawn turned slowly, ready to depart. Kara stood beside Captain Holt, looking at the peaceful moon below. We did it, she said. Holt nodded. Yes, but it's only the beginning. The galaxy will remember this day. Do you think they'll fear us? She asked quietly. Maybe, Holt replied. But fear isn't what matters. What matters is that they know, when the innocent cry out, humans will come. The ship's engines ignited, glowing like suns. One by one, the Deathworlder fleet began to rise higher into the dark sky, leaving trails of blue fire behind them. Down on the moon, Lyra watched them go, her small hand raised toward the heavens. Thank you, she whispered. And in that moment, across the quiet stars, it felt as if the universe itself listened. Humanity had once again proven what made them different. Not their strength, not their weapons, but their heart. They fought like storms, they loved like fire, and they answered when no one else would. Vareth was free. The people were alive. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of their world, the Deathworlders prepared for their next mission, ready to descend once more when another desperate voice called out into the dark. The days after the Deathworlders' arrival were filled with tension, confusion, and an unusual kind of hope that the people of Zalora had never felt before. For the first time in many years, the sound of alien ships above their skies didn't bring fear. It brought silence, awe, and a strange belief that maybe, just maybe, their prayers had been heard. When the Deathworlders descended from the stars, they looked nothing like what the Zalorians had imagined. Tall, strong, scarred, and carrying strange weapons, these humans seemed carved out of the storms themselves. Their eyes carried a mix of wisdom and wildness, as if they had seen death too many times but still chose to stand and fight. At first, The leaders of Zalora did not know how to speak to them. The Deathworlders had a translator device, and their deep voices echoed across the halls of the ruined palace. Their leader, a human named Commander Ryan Holt, listened carefully to every word spoken by the Zalorian Council. The oldest elder explained how their world had suffered under the tyranny of the Vrike Empire, how their children were taken, how their lands were burned, and how they had sent out messages across the stars begging for help. Ryan remained quiet for a long time, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with something dark. When he finally spoke, his words were simple but powerful. You asked for help. You will have it. But you must understand we fight in our way. The Zalorians didn't understand what he meant until the following sunrise. The Deathworlders moved with a level of discipline that seemed almost frightening. Their ships, hovering like silent beasts in the sky, released units of soldiers equipped with technology that Zalora had never seen. The Deathworlders set up defense lines, scanned enemy movement, and built field camps in hours. The Zalorians watched from a distance, unsure if these new warriors were angels or demons. When the first Vrake Scout Patrol appeared, the humans didn't hesitate. They attacked with precision, their weapons slicing through armor like it was paper. It was the first time in decades that Zalorian eyes saw the enemy fall. The news spread across the towns and villages like wildfire. The Deathworlders have struck back. For the first time, the people dared to dream of freedom. Mothers whispered the stories to their children, soldiers lifted their spirits, and even the wounded found strength to rise again. But war was never clean. As days passed, the cost of their alliance became clear. The Deathworlders fought with an intensity that frightened even their allies. They were relentless, destroying enemy strongholds, burning supply lines, and hunting down the Vrake without mercy. Some Zalorians began to wonder if their saviors were too powerful, too cold, too fierce. They couldn't understand how humans could walk through fire, lose comrades, and still keep fighting. Commander Ryan noticed the fear in their eyes. One night, as the fires of battle glowed across the horizon, he stood with Leora, one of the Zalorian healers. She had seen the cost of every battle, the wounded and dying, human and Zalorian alike. You don't stop, she said softly. Even when you bleed, you keep going. Why? Ryan looked up at the stars and said, because on our world we learned that mercy without strength is helpless. We fight not because we love war, but because we hate what happens when evil wins. That night, Leora realized that these humans were not just warriors, they were survivors. They came from a place where every breath was a struggle, every day a battle against a world trying to kill them, and somehow they had turned that struggle into strength. That was why they were called Deathworlders, because they came from a world where only the strong-hearted survived. As the war intensified, Ryan and his soldiers began training the Zalorians to fight beside them. At first, the Zalorians were clumsy, unused to human tactics and weapons, but the Deathworlders were patient teachers. They didn't just train them to shoot or fight, they taught them courage. They taught them to stand their ground even when the sky was falling. Slowly, the Zalorians began to change. The hopeless eyes of the people started to shine again. Then came the darkest moment of the war. The Vrake discovered the Deathworlders' main camp and launched a massive assault. The sky turned red as energy blasts rained down. Human and Zalorian soldiers fought side by side, shouting, bleeding, refusing to give in. The Deathworlders held the line even when outnumbered 5-1. Commander Ryan was at the front, shouting orders, his armor cracked, his face covered in dirt and blood. Every shot he fired was a message to the universe, you will not break us. The battle lasted for hours. When it ended, hundreds had fallen, but the Vrake were pushed back for the first time in history. The battlefield was silent except for the crackle of burning wreckage. Leora moved among the injured, her hands trembling as she healed those she could. She found Ryan kneeling beside one of his soldiers, his eyes filled with both pride and sorrow. You won, she said softly. No, he replied, his voice hoarse. We survived. That's how winning starts. After that day, the Deathworlders were no longer seen as outsiders. They were brothers and sisters in arms. They ate together, fought together, buried their dead together. The bond between the two species grew strong, built on shared pain and shared hope. The Zalorians began to believe that they could rebuild their world, not as victims, but as survivors. In the quiet moments between battles, the humans shared stories of Earth, their homeworld of storms, volcanoes, and beasts. They spoke of oceans and mountains, of how they learned to adapt, to endure, to overcome. The Zalorians listened with wide eyes. realizing that the Deathworlders' strength didn't come from weapons or power. It came from the heart, from the will to keep going when everything seemed lost. By the end of that long and terrible month, the tide of war had turned. The Vrake, once unstoppable, were retreating. Villages that had been under occupation for years were freed. Children who had only known fear began to laugh again, and every time a Deathworlder ship passed overhead, people raised their hands to the sky in gratitude. But deep inside, Ryan knew the war wasn't over. Evil never vanished completely, it only hid and waited. Still, for that moment, he allowed himself to breathe. He stood on the hills of Zalora, watching the twin suns rise, and whispered, "We came because they prayed. We'll stay until they no longer have to." That morning, the people of Zalora gathered in the city square. They looked up at the Deathworlder flag beside their own, fluttering together in the wind. The world was scarred, but it was free, and the Deathworlders, those fierce children of a cruel world, had become their saviors, not because they were gods, but because they were human. In the silence that followed, a new belief took root across Zalora. When the universe forgets you, pray, and maybe, just maybe, the Deathworlders will descend from the stars once more. Months passed after the great battle that changed everything on Zalora. The skies that were once filled with enemy ships were now quiet. The land that had been scarred by fire was slowly beginning to heal. The Deathworlders and the Zalorians worked side by side, rebuilding villages, planting crops, and bringing life back to a planet that had almost forgotten what peace felt like. Yet, even in this peace, the shadows of war lingered in everyone's heart. They had all lost something, families, friends, homes. But they had also gained something far more powerful: unity, courage, and hope. Commander Ryan Holt walked through the ruins of what used to be the Zalorian capital. It was now being rebuilt brick by brick. Children played in the streets, laughter echoing where once there had been screams. The sight made him smile, though deep inside he still carried the weight of the war. His soldiers, the Deathworlders, had suffered greatly too. Many had fallen, and their names were carved into a memorial stone that stood tall in the middle of the city square. The Zalorians had built it with their own hands, as a promise never to forget the ones who came from the stars to save them. Every morning, people gathered around the memorial. They placed flowers, whispered prayers, and thanked the humans who had given them a second chance at life. Leora, the healer, was among them every day. She had become a symbol of the bond between the two races. Her gentle heart and tireless spirit had saved countless lives during the war. She often worked with the Deathworlder medics, learning from their knowledge and teaching them her healing techniques in return. The humans admired her strength and kindness, and she in turn admired their resilience. Rian often watched her from a distance. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of home, of Earth, the blue planet he had left behind. He knew he and his team would eventually have to return there. Their mission was temporary, but their hearts had become tied to this world in ways no one had expected. The Zalorians were no longer strangers to them. They were family. The thought of leaving them behind felt almost unbearable. One evening, as the twin suns set behind the mountains, Leora found Rian sitting near the edge of the city, looking out at the glowing horizon. The sky was painted with colors that reminded him of fire and blood, of victory and loss. "You're thinking about leaving," she said softly. Ryan didn't answer for a while. He took a deep breath and said, "Earth needs us. There are others out there who need help too. That's what we do. We go where we're called." Leora nodded slowly, though her heart ached at the thought. "And what about us?" she asked quietly. Ryan looked at her, his eyes heavy with emotion. "You don't need us anymore," he said. "You've learned to fight, to stand, to believe. You prayed for help and you got it. But now you must become your own strength." His words stayed with her for days. The Zalorians had always depended on others to save them, first on their leaders, then on the Deathworlders. But now they were ready to stand on their own feet. The humans had given them the greatest gift, not weapons or power, but courage. When the time came for the Deathworlders to leave, the entire city gathered to say goodbye. The air was filled with both joy and sadness. Music played softly through the square, a melody written by Zalorian musicians in honor of their human allies. The ship stood ready on the landing fields, glowing silver under the sun's light. Soldiers in dark armor stood in neat rows, their helmets under their arms, faces marked by scars and memories. The people brought gifts, flowers, food, hand-woven fabrics and small pieces of art made to show gratitude. Leora stepped forward carrying a small crystal pendant. It glowed faintly with a warm blue light. She handed it to Ryan and said, "This holds a piece of our world's heart. Wherever you go, may it remind you that you're not alone in the stars." Ryan accepted it quietly, his throat tightening. "Thank you," he whispered. "This world will always be part of us." Before leaving, Ryan gave a final speech to the people. His voice echoed through the square. "You called us because you believed no one would come. But we came, not as gods, not as saviors, but as fellow beings who understand pain, loss, and hope. The universe is vast and cruel, but there are still hearts brave enough to fight for what's right. Never forget that the strength you prayed for now lives inside you." As the Deathworlders boarded their ships, the crowd began to chant, "May the stars guide you," over and over until the sound rose like thunder. The engines roared to life and the great ships lifted into the sky, leaving trails of blue light behind them. Leora stood watching, tears running down her face but her heart full of pride. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Zalora. After the humans left, life slowly returned to normal. The Zalorians began building schools, farms, and new cities. They learned to use the technology the Deathworlders had left behind, not for war but for progress. They built hospitals, clean water systems, and defense towers, not because they feared invasion but because they wanted to protect what they had rebuilt. Every year on the same day the Deathworlders had departed, they celebrated Unity Day, a festival of light and gratitude. Songs were sung, stories were told, and children played games pretending to be brave Deathworlders saving the galaxy. Leora became a leader of the new Zalorian Council. She often looked up at the stars, wondering where Ryan and his team were. Sometimes she thought she saw a small light moving slowly across the night sky, a ship traveling between worlds, and she smiled, whispering a prayer for their safety. In her heart, she believed that one day their paths would cross again. Far away, on a distant Deathworlder base, Ryan stood before a large window, staring out into the endless darkness of space. The crystal pendant Leora had given him hung around his neck, glowing softly. It reminded him of warmth, of hope, of a planet that had believed in miracles. His second-in-command approached and asked, "Do you think we'll ever see them again, sir?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Maybe not," he said, "but that's not what matters. What matters is that they no longer need saving." The Deathworlders continued their missions, moving from one corner of the galaxy to another, answering calls for help, fighting against oppression, and bringing hope wherever they went. Yet Zalora remained special to them. It was the world that had changed their hearts. It was the place that had reminded them why they fought, not for glory or conquest, but for the simple truth that every life mattered. Years later, a message reached the Deathworlder Command Center. It was from Zalora. The message showed a peaceful world, green and thriving, its cities bright with light. The Zalorian Council appeared on the screen, smiling. Leora, older now, spoke. "To the Deathworlders, our friends among the stars, know that your gift lives on. We stand strong. We stand free. And we will always remember those who descended from the heavens when we prayed for help." When the message ended, silence filled the room. Some smiled, others wiped their eyes. Ryan simply closed his eyes and whispered, "Good." For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. That night, he looked out the window again. The stars twinkled brightly as if winking back at him. Somewhere among them, he believed, were countless other worlds still waiting, still praying. And when their cries reached across the void, the Deathworlders would answer again because that was who they were. They were not conquerors or gods. They were protectors. They were proof that even in the darkest corners of the universe, light could descend from the stars, and so, the legend of the Deathworlders spread far and wide, passed from planet to planet, from one civilization to another. It became a story of faith and courage, of humans who fought not for power but for peace. And every time someone looked up at the night sky, they whispered the same words the Zalorians once had. "If we pray hard enough, maybe the Deathworlders will hear us." Thus, the cycle continued, hope born from despair, strength born from suffering, and light born from darkness. The Deathworlders had not just saved a world, they had ignited a belief across the galaxy that even in the coldest silence of space, compassion could roar louder than any weapon.